The member for Barara.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Will the Minister advise the House of the importance of upholding the non-interference in the domestic political affairs of other nations principle?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs will stay in her seat. Members on my left interjected right through that question. I'm going to ask the member to repeat it. And if I hear any more interjections from the member for McMahon like incoming, he'll be outgoing. The member for Barara has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Will the Minister advise the House of the importance of upholding the principle of non-interference in the domestic political affairs of other nations?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs. The member for Sydney is warned. The member for McEwen will leave under 94A.
You'll get in the front out.
Okay. Before we move on, anyone want to join him? The Minister for Foreign Affairs has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Barara for his question. Let me be very clear. The Australian Labor Party's conduct in orchestrating for a New Zealand member of the Labor Party to ask a question in the New Zealand Parliament designed to undermine the Australian
The member for
Deputy
Sydney
Prime
has been
Minister
warned. It's a final
is not
warning.
only highly improper, it is in direct breach of the international obligation for non-interference. Mr Speaker, Labor have now been well and truly caught out. Senator Penny Wong's Chief of Staff instigated a situation where the Labor Member of Parliament in New Zealand was directed to ask questions about the Deputy Prime Minister, and the member for Grainler let the cat out of the bag today when he said on morning radio that the Deputy Prime Minister's name was raised in the conversation. Of course, he's been monstered now, but he let the cat out of the bag. Now, Mr Speaker, that means that the Labor Party are misleading the Australian people, and New Zealand Labor, no less, have judged what they were asked to do by the Australian Labor Party as inappropriate, unacceptable, wrong, and should not have happened. And Mr Speaker, the Labor Party have also misled the Australian people by claiming that it was only questions from Fairfax Media to the New Zealand government that sparked this incident. Not so, according to the Foreign Minister of New Zealand, who has said that it was in fact the questions from the New Zealand Labor member at the instigation of Labor that sparked the entire incident. As the New Zealand media are reporting, the New Zealand government is under no obligation to answer questions from the Australian media, but as soon as those questions were put on notice in the New Zealand Parliament, the New Zealand government had an obligation, a legal obligation to answer. So the Australian Labor Party set up the New Zealand government. As Prime Minister Bill English said, these are serious issues, and there were significant misjudgments by the New Zealand Labor Party about urging them to interfere in the Australian political process. As the New Zealand Foreign Minister said, this is extraordinary, unprecedented behaviour to seek to invoke the New Zealand Parliament. And as New Zealand Labor have condemned Labor in Australia, unacceptable, inappropriate, wrong behaviour, it should never have happened. Labor stands condemned.
Members on my left, Manager Opposition Business can just pause for a second. The members for Solomon, Newcastle, Gellibrand, Lindsay I mentioned, numerous others, will cease interjecting or they'll leave the chamber rapidly. Question time is for the Parliament and for the public, and I won't tolerate a wall of noise through the answers of ministers. The Manager of Opposition Business has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Would the Minister for Foreign Affairs please tell the House some more about the evil, treacherous, treasonous international conspiracy that she has exposed in this House time and again?
Minister for Foreign Affairs will resume her seat. The member for Eden Monero can leave under 94A. The Minister for Foreign Affairs has the call.
Mr Speaker, the hubris of the Australian Labor Party on this issue is extraordinary. Apparently, the Labor Party believes that they are above the law. There's one rule for the Labor Party and one rule for the rest of Australia.
Members on my left.
Craig Thompson was allowed to sit in this parliament when he was in clear breach of the law. The Leader of the Opposition condones the lawlessness of his unions. The Labor Party have breached the most fundamental international principle and they laugh about it. Prime Minister Bill English said in the New Zealand Parliament yesterday that these were serious issues where the Labor Party had set up the New Zealand Labor Party to undertake a series of actions that the Labor Party in New Zealand have now admitted were wrong, inappropriate, unacceptable and should not have happened, and it was all at the behest of the Australian Labor Party, who stop at nothing, will trash any principle, trash any promise, trash any element of decency in order to gain a political advantage. This is a significant and serious issue, as the New Zealand Prime Minister has pointed out. And for Labor to find it amusing that Senator Wong, who holds herself out to be the Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs, would direct her Chief of Staff to contact a sitting member of another parliament to use another parliament as a platform to launch an attack on the Australian Deputy Prime Minister is an utter disgrace.
Absolute disgrace.
And the New Zealand Prime Minister was asked whether he thought I was correct in raising this issue. And the New Zealand Foreign Minister said it's a perfectly reasonable reaction given the fact that a New Zealand Member of Parliament from the New Zealand Labor Party, under the influence from the Australian Labor Party, is asking questions clearly designed to remove a government member in Australia. That is the bigger problem here. And Mr Speaker, it behoves the Labor Party, not at all well, for them to trivialise what is a serious issue. The New Zealand Prime Minister says it's a serious issue. The New Zealand Foreign Minister says it's a serious issue. The New Zealand Labor Party are furious that they were conned into unacceptable, inappropriate behaviour that was wrong and should never have happened. Shame, Labor.
Just before I call the member for Melbourne, whose question it is next, I'm not going to keep repeating myself about the level of noise. Members know precisely what they're doing. I will take more severe action if necessary. If members are going to behave in this fashion, frankly, they're snubbing their nose at the Parliament, and I'm not going to put up with it. The member for Melbourne.
Thank you, Speaker. I do have a question, very brief.